The sound that haunts Amelia isn't the explosion of laughter. It isn't the collective, sharp gasp from the wealthiest families in Boston. It isn't even the voice of her husband, Thomas, standing frozen, his silence a blade in her back. The sound that echoes is the dry, vicious tear of silk. It's the sound of her mother-in-law's hand, adorned with a gaudy diamond, ripping her dress from shoulder to waist, exposing her to a ballroom of strangers. "This is what happens to parasites," Margaret Davenport hissed, her face a mask of triumph. In that second, Amelia wasn't a wife. She was an example. The polished silver of the Davenport home felt cold to the touch, much like the family itself. Amelia had married into a name that echoed through the brick-lined streets of Beacon Hill, a name synonymous with old money and unspoken rules. The Davenports were a Boston institution, and Amelia, with her simple origins and her quiet passion for running a small, artisanal bakery in Cambridge, was a persistent, nagging anomaly. Her marriage to Thomas Davenport had, in its first year, felt like a whirlwind romance. He was charmed by her authenticity, her flour-dusted hands, and her complete lack of interest in his trust fund. But the charm, Amelia learned, was a coating that wore thin under the constant, abrasive pressure of his family. Thomas was a man molded by expectation, and his spine, it seemed, was forged from wax, melting steadily under the heat of his mother's disapproval. "Amelia, darling," Margaret Davenport would say, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension that set Amelia's teeth on edge. "That apron. It's quaint, but you're a Davenport now. Don't you think it's time to leave the baking to the help?" Margaret, a woman who wore her Loro Piana sweaters like armor, saw Amelia's bakery, the gilded crust, as a personal affront. It wasn't a career, it was a hobby, and a dreadfully middle-class one at that. "She likes it, Mother," Thomas would murmur, not looking up from his copy of the Wall Street Journal. His defense was always lukewarm, a token gesture that died before it crossed the room. The tension was suffocating in the weeks leading up to the annual Davenport Foundation Charity Gala. This was not just a party. It was the cornerstone of the Davenports' social and financial calendar. It was where they cemented alliances, displayed their power, and, most importantly, laundered their reputation through seven-figure donations to art museums and opera houses. This year, the gala was more critical than ever. Richard Davenport, the family patriarch, was in the final stages of a desperate negotiation. A merger between the fading Davenport Industries and the monolithic, enigmatic powerhouse, Vance Holdings. A deal with Vance Holdings wasn't just a lifeline, it was a resurrection. The name Vance was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in their circles. The CEO, Arthur Vance, was a recluse, a ghost who moved markets and toppled corporations from a New York penthouse. He was rumored to be utterly ruthless, and the Davenports were terrified of him and desperate for his approval. "This gala must be perfect," Richard had announced at Sunday dinner, his eyes scanning the table. "Arthur Vance's COO is flying in. Every detail matters." Margaret's eyes had immediately flicked to Amelia. "Which is why, Amelia, you simply cannot wear that beige thing you wore last year. Claire and I will take you shopping. We can't have you looking like you're attending a PTA meeting." Claire, Thomas's sister, had snickered into a champagne flute. "Maybe she can just borrow one of the maid's uniforms, Mother. It would be more authentic." "Claire, be nice," Thomas said, with no force. Amelia had smiled, a tight, painful stretch of her lips. "Thank you, Margaret, but I have a dress." The truth was, Amelia had a past she never spoke of, a past locked away, just like the private number in her old, hidden flip phone. She had left a world of suffocating, sterile wealth to be normal, to be loved for who she was, not what she was. Her father, a man who saw the world in spreadsheets and stock tickers, had been apoplectic when she'd announced she was marrying Thomas Davenport, and that she would be doing so without her last name and without his fortune. "They're parasites, Amelia," her father's gravelly voice had warned her over a secure line. "They're third generation coasting on a name that's lost its shine. They will bleed you dry, and when they find you're not who they think you are, they'll hate you for it. But when they find out who you really are, they will be insufferable. You're making a terrible mistake." "I love him, Dad, and he loves me," she had insisted, her voice full of a naivete that now made her stomach clench. "Love?" he had scoffed. "A poor investment." Now, living in this gilded cage, his words felt like a prophecy. She had insisted on living modestly, using the profits from her bakery to support herself and Thomas, who was on a stipend from his family. This, she had believed, would prove her love was real. Instead, it had simply given the Davenports their ammunition. To them, her modesty wasn't a choice. It was a brand. The brand of poverty. The night before the gala, Thomas found her in their Cambridge apartment, staring at the dress she'd bought. It was a simple, elegant, deep blue silk gown from a small designer. "Is that it?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Mother's holding a Jason Wu gown for you at Saks." She put it on the family account. "I like this one, Thomas," Amelia said quietly. He sighed, the sound of exasperation she had come to know so well. "Amelia, can't you just, for one night, play the part? This Vance Holdings deal, it's everything. We can't afford any missteps. You represent me. You represent this family." "And when do you represent me, Thomas?" she asked, the words sharper than she intended. He flinched. "This isn't the time, Amelia. Just look the part. Please." He didn't wait for an answer, just walked into the shower, the sound of running water drowning out the silence of their failing marriage. Amelia clutched the silk dress, the paper-thin defense she had against the family that was about to tear her life apart. The Davenport mansion on Beacon Hill was a fortress of red brick and old-world arrogance. Tonight, it was illuminated from the foundation to the gables, a beacon of Brahmin prestige drawing in the city's elite. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open the doors of identical black Rolls-Royce and Bentley vehicles, while flashes from the Boston Globe Society photographers illuminated the stone steps. Amelia stood beside Thomas, her hand on his arm, feeling like a counterfeit coin. Her simple blue dress, which had felt elegant in her apartment, now seemed glaringly inadequate beside the glittering cascades of sequins and heirloom diamonds. Claire, in a crimson, backless Oscar de la Renta, shot Amelia a look of pitying contempt. "Oh, Amelia," Claire drawled, loud enough for the passing guests to hear. "You actually wore it. How brave." Thomas stiffened, a flash of irritation in his eyes, but it was directed at Amelia, not his sister. "Claire," he muttered, before steering Amelia into the grand ballroom. The room was suffocatingly opulent. Towering bouquets of white orchids and lilies scented the air, their perfume mingling with the expensive colognes of the men and the Chanel No. 5, favored by the older women. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, providing a civilized backing track to the ruthless networking. "There's Mr. Harrison," Thomas said, his eyes scanning the room, his hand dropping from Amelia's. "He's the COO from Vance Holdings. I must speak with him. Try to mingle." He was gone in an instant, absorbed into a circle of men in bespoke tuxedos, leaving Amelia utterly alone. She felt the eyes on her, the whispers. She was the plain brown bird in a cage of peacocks. She saw Mrs. Abernathy, a society columnist whose pen could ruin a reputation, assessing her dress with a critical squint. Amelia retreated toward the champagne tower, hoping to find a quiet corner. Margaret Davenport intercepted her, a predator, spotting a weakened gazelle. "Amelia, darling, you look positively economical." Margaret smiled, her eyes cold. "I do hope you're not feeling overwhelmed. This is, after all, a very important night for Richard and Thomas." "It's a beautiful party, Margaret," Amelia replied, her voice steady. "Yes, it is," Margaret agreed, plucking a flute of champagne from a passing tray. "It's a celebration of what we've built, what we represent. Legacy, Amelia. Lineage. Something I'm sure you understand is earned, not just married into." The barb was clear. Amelia was an outsider, a parasite feeding off a legacy she didn't deserve. "Excuse me," Amelia said, turning away, her cheeks burning. She found a momentary reprieve on the terrace, the cold November air a welcome shock. She watched the lights of the city glitter below, feeling a profound sense of dislocation. She had left one world of immense wealth, only to be trapped and humiliated by another, lesser version. Her father had built an empire from nothing. The Davenports had inherited one and were watching it crumble. The irony was bitter. "Hiding?" Amelia turned. It was Claire, a malicious smirk on her face. "Not hiding, Claire. Getting some air." "Right." Claire took a delicate sip of her drink. "You know, we all thought Thomas was just going through a phase, a rebellion, dating the help, as it were. We just never thought he'd be stupid enough to marry her. I own my own business, Claire, a successful one." "Oh, the bakery." Claire laughed, a high, tinkling sound. "It's adorable, like a little girl playing shop. But this," she gestured to the grand house, the expensive party, "this is the real world. And in the real world, you're a liability. Mother is furious. You're embarrassing Thomas in front of the Vance Holdings people. You're dragging our name through the mud with your simplicity." "I think you mistake simple for sincere, Claire. Something this family wouldn't recognize." Claire's smile vanished. "You little—" "Claire! Amelia! What are you two doing out here?" Margaret's voice cut through the tension. She glided onto the terrace, her eyes landing on Amelia. "Come inside, both of you. They're serving the appetizers." Margaret led the way, placing a proprietary hand on Amelia's back, steering her toward a cluster of guests. "You must try the canapes, Amelia. We have a wonderful—" "Oh, goodness!" Margaret stumbled, her hand lurching forward. A full glass of dark, viscous, balsamic glaze, meant for the fig and prosciutto crostini, emptied itself directly down the front of Amelia's blue silk dress. A collective gasp went up from the nearby guests. The dark stain spread rapidly, a hideous, sticky mockery. "Oh, my dear!" Margaret shrieked, her hand flying to her mouth in faux horror. "How clumsy of me! Your lovely dress! It's ruined! Absolutely ruined!" Amelia stood frozen, the sticky sweet smell of the glaze filling her nostrils, the sudden cold as the liquid soaked through the silk to her skin. She looked at Margaret's face and saw, in the briefest flash, a glint of pure, unadulterated triumph. This was no accident. "Quickly, quickly," Margaret said, grabbing Amelia's arm in a vice-like grip. "Let's get you upstairs before more people see this mess." She began to steer Amelia toward the grand staircase, away from the ballroom. Claire followed close behind, her face a mask of poorly concealed glee. Amelia looked back, desperate for Thomas. He was standing across the room, watching. He saw the glaze. He saw his mother's iron grip on his wife's arm. He saw Amelia's eyes plead with him. He looked away. The rejection was more painful than the humiliation. It was the final, fatal crack in the foundation of their marriage. As Margaret practically dragged her up the stairs, Amelia knew she wasn't being taken to be helped. She was being taken to be finished. The upstairs hallway of the Davenport mansion was a gallery of ancestors. Stern-faced men and women in dark oils stared down from their gilded frames, their expressions as cold and unforgiving as the two women now flanking Amelia. Margaret's grip on her arm was bruising. "In here," Margaret ordered, shoving Amelia into a large, opulent guest bedroom. Claire followed and clicked the heavy wooden door shut, the sound final and ominous. "Really, Amelia," Margaret began, her voice dropping the pretense of concern, becoming a low, venomous hiss. "Did you think this was going to last? Did you think we were so stupid?" "Margaret, it was an accident," Amelia started, clutching the ruined fabric of her dress. "Stop lying," Claire snapped, her face twisted in disgust. "You've been lying since the day you met Thomas, playing the simple, innocent little baker. We know exactly what you are." "What are you talking about?" Amelia's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a cold dread creeping up her spine. This was more than a spilled drink. This was a planned execution. "We're talking about this." Margaret moved to the mahogany dresser and yanked open a drawer. She pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. "Do you recognize this?" She opened it. Inside sat a cheap, gaudy replica of the Davenport heirloom earrings, a set of sapphire and diamond clusters that Margaret had been wearing earlier in the evening. "No," Amelia said, confused. "What is that?" "Don't play coy." Margaret's voice rose to a screech. "These are my earrings, my great-grandmother's. I took them off for a moment, left them right here, and you thief, you thought you'd swap them. You thought you'd take the real ones and leave this paste. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" Amelia stared, horrified. "What? Margaret, that's insane. I haven't been in this room all night. You're wearing your earrings." Amelia pointed to Margaret's ears. The real, glittering sapphire earrings were plainly visible. Claire let out a cruel laugh. "Oh, you're pathetic. You didn't even check to see if she'd put them back on. You just saw your chance, swapped them and got caught. You were probably going to sell them to pay for your sad little bread shop." "This is a setup," Amelia breathed, the full, horrifying reality of the situation crashing down on her. They had planned this. The spill, the replica, the accusation. They were framing her. "It's over, Amelia," Margaret said, her eyes glittering with a madness Amelia hadn't seen before. "You came into this house with nothing, and you'll leave with less. You are a gold-digging fraud, and I am going to expose you to everyone." "Thomas will not let you do this," Amelia said, her voice shaking but desperate. "He knows me." "Thomas?" Margaret laughed, a truly ugly sound. "Thomas does what is best for this family. He knows this deal with Vance Holdings will be ruined if a scandal breaks that he married a common thief. He will thank me for cutting this cancer out." "You won't get away with this," Amelia whispered, tears of rage and humiliation welling in her eyes. "Oh, I already have." Margaret's smile was terrifying. "You want to be trash? I'll treat you like trash." Before Amelia could react, Margaret lunged at her. She grabbed the collar of the silk dress, already sticky with the balsamic glaze. "This dress, you bought it with my son's money, didn't you? You have nothing of your own." "No, I bought this with—" "Lies!" Margaret shrieked, and she yanked. The sound of the silk ripping was explosive in the quiet room. It was the sound Amelia would remember forever. Margaret pulled again, harder, tearing the fabric from Amelia's shoulder down to her waist. The dress, now a ruined rack, gaped open, exposing her slip and the side of her bra. Amelia cried out, more in shock than pain, stumbling back, trying to cover herself. "See," Claire said, filming the entire thing with her phone, her eyes wide with malicious delight. "This is your true self, a cheap, tawdry little thing hidden under a veneer of decency." "Stop, please," Amelia begged, tears streaming down her face now. "Now get out of my house," Margaret snarled, her chest heaving. She grabbed Amelia's arm again and dragged her to the door. "No, Margaret, you can't." "I can. And I will." Margaret yanked the door open. The string quartet in the ballroom below had just finished a piece. A momentary, perfect silence had fallen over the gala. Every eye in the grand foyer was turned toward the staircase as Margaret shoved Amelia, half-dressed and sobbing, out onto the landing. The collective gasp was like the sucking of all air from the room. Amelia froze, one hand clutching the torn fragments of her dress to her chest, the other trying to hide her face. She saw it all in a horrifying, slow-motion tableau. The shocked faces of Boston's elite, the frozen smiles of the waitstaff, the flash of Mrs. Abernathy's eyes, wide with the scent of the decade's biggest scandal. And she saw Thomas. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, next to the man from Vance Holdings. He was staring up at her. His face was white, his mouth slightly open. He saw her shame, her dress, her tears. He saw his mother and sister standing behind her, triumphant. "Thomas," Amelia whispered, the word a desperate, dying prayer. "Thomas, help me." He looked at her, his eyes blank with a cocktail of terror and shame. He saw his entire future, the Vance deal, his family's legacy, all hanging in the balance. Then, slowly, he turned his back. He turned his back on his wife. That was the moment Amelia's heart, which had been cracked by his neglect, finally shattered into dust. The humiliation of her in-laws was one thing. The betrayal of her husband was another. "Get out," Margaret hissed, giving her one final violent shove. Amelia stumbled, catching herself on the banister. She held her head high, the tears freezing on her cheeks. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. With as much dignity as a person in a ripped dress, stained and humiliated, could muster, she descended the grand staircase, one step at a time. She walked through the center of the silent, staring crowd. She walked past her husband, who refused to look at her. She walked to the massive front doors, pulled one open, and stepped out into the biting cold of the Boston night, the door clicking shut behind her, sealing her fate. Or so they thought. The cold of the November night was a violent slap, instantly chilling her exposed skin and making her shiver uncontrollably. The Beacon Hill street was quiet, the cobblestones slick with a fine, misty rain that had begun to fall. Amelia stood on the pavement, clutching the rags of her dress, the laughter and music from the house behind her, a dull, monstrous heartbeat. She was alone, utterly and completely. The family she had tried to join had cast her out in the most brutal way imaginable. The man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed her identity for, had watched it happen and chosen them. The tears came again, hot and silent. She began to walk, with no destination in mind. She just needed to move, to put distance between herself and that house of horrors. Her thin-soled heels clicked unevenly on the ancient stones. A couple in evening wear, likely heading to the gala, passed her. They stared, the woman's hand flying to her mouth, the man's eyes widening in shock before he quickly looked away. Humiliation washed over her anew. She was a spectacle, a ruined woman on a dark street. She walked for blocks, the mist turning into a steady, cold drizzle, plastering her hair to her face and soaking the torn silk. She was freezing, but the ice in her heart was colder. She passed a small park, a familiar one where she and Thomas had once... No, she couldn't think of him. He was gone. The Thomas she loved had never existed. He was just a phantom she had created. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. They're parasites, Amelia. He had been right. He had been right about everything. And she, in her youthful arrogance, had dismissed his warning, believing in a fairy tale. She found herself in the Boston Common, the rain now heavy and relentless. She huddled under the bare branches of a large oak tree, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Her life, as she knew it, was over. She had nothing. No home, no husband, her bakery. They would probably try to take that too, claiming it was built with Davenport money. She had one thing left, one connection to a life she had sprinted away from, thinking it was a prison. She realized now that a prison with golden bars was still a prison, but at least it was safe. Her hand went to the small, hidden pocket sewn into the lining of her purse, a purse Margaret and Claire hadn't bothered to take. Inside, protected by a waterproof plastic case, was a simple, old-fashioned flip phone. It had one number programmed in it, a direct, encrypted line to a man who could move mountains. Her fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the phone. She flipped it open. The small screen glowed, a beacon in the dark. She pressed 1 and held it to her ear. It rang once, twice. Yes. The voice was not a hello. It was a command, gravelly, impatient, and vibrating with an authority that could quiet boardrooms and intimidate world leaders. Amelia tried to speak, but a sob caught in her throat. "Who is this?" the voice demanded, sharper now. "Dad!" she finally choked out, the word feeling foreign on her tongue after so long. "Dad, it's me. It's Amelia." The silence on the other end was absolute. For a terrifying second, she thought he had hung up. Then, the ice in his voice cracked, just slightly. "Amelia? What's wrong? Where are you?" I'm in Boston, at the Common." The dam broke. The humiliation, the betrayal, the cold, it all poured out of her in a single, wretched sob. "Dad, you were right. You were right about everything." Another pause, the sound of a heavy chair pushing back. "What did they do to you?" His voice was dangerously quiet now. This was the voice he used when an executive had lost him $1 billion. They tore my dress. They called me a thief. They pushed me out, Dad, in front of everyone. And Thomas, he watched. He let them." She could hear him breathing, a slow, controlled inhale and exhale. He wasn't comforting her. He was containing a rage so vast it could power a city. "Stay exactly where you are," he commanded, "by the Parkman bandstand. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. A car will be there in 4 minutes." "Dad, I'm so cold. 4 minutes, Amelia." The line clicked dead. Amelia huddled by the bandstand, the rain washing the sticky glaze from her skin. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Not just safety, but power. The Davenports had attacked a baker. They had no idea they had just declared war on a king. It was closer to 3 minutes. A car turned onto the street, its headlights cutting through the rain. It wasn't a taxi or an Uber. It was a black Bentley Mulsanne, its windows tinted to an impenetrable darkness, its presence on the quiet street as subtle as a tank. It pulled to the curb, and a man in a dark suit, built like a linebacker, stepped out from the driver's side, holding a large black umbrella. He walked quickly to Amelia. "Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice respectful. The name Vance felt like a shock. She hadn't heard herself called that in 3 years. "Yes," she whispered. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't stare at her dress. He simply draped a heavy, dry cashmere blanket over her shoulders and gently guided her to the car, holding the umbrella over her head. He opened the back door. The interior of the car was a different world. It was silent, warm, and smelled of rich leather and old money, real old money, the kind that didn't need to host galas to prove itself. Amelia slid onto the plush seat, wrapping the blanket around her trembling body. "Where are we going?" she asked, as the driver got in and the car pulled silently away from the curb. "To the penthouse at the Four Seasons, Miss Vance. Your father is on his way. His jet left New York 10 minutes ago." Amelia leaned her head back against the buttery leather. The driver touched a console, and a small screen lit up. Her father's face appeared, live from his jet. He looked older, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, intelligent, and right now burning with a cold fire. "You're safe, Amelia," he said. "Get warm, get dry. I'll be there in an hour." "Dad, what are you going to do?" Arthur Vance looked at his daughter, his only child, shivering and humiliated. His expression was terrible to behold. "The Davenports," he said, his voice a flat, level promise of annihilation, "are about to learn the precise, documented, and catastrophic difference between status and power." Arthur Vance did not rule his empire with noise and fury. He was an architect of silence. He didn't throw plates. He signed papers that liquidated companies. He didn't shout. He made quiet phone calls that ended careers. His rage was not a fire. It was a glacier, cold, immense, and unstoppable, crushing everything in its path. By the time his Gulfstream GX-50 was descending over the Boston skyline, the first pieces of his retribution were already in motion. He arrived at the Four Seasons penthouse, not with a hug, but with a team. A doctor was there to check Amelia for any injuries. A lawyer, flown in from New York, was quietly taking notes. A woman who introduced herself as his personal assistant, Maria, had already run a hot bath for Amelia and laid out a set of simple, impossibly soft cashmere pajamas. While Amelia soaked in the tub, trying to scrub the night's humiliation from her skin, Arthur Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his phone to his ear, his back to the room. He was looking down at the lights of the city, at the very neighborhood that had just tried to destroy his daughter. "Mark," he said into the phone, speaking to his COO, the very man who had been at the gala. "Yes, I heard what happened. It's worse than you think. No, you are not to speak to Thomas Davenport. You are not to look at him. I want you to call Richard Davenport at exactly 7 a.m. Tell him the merger is off. Cite unforeseen moral liabilities in the family leadership. Yes, moral. I want that word used. Then, I want you to trigger the default clause on the bridge loan we gave them 2 months ago. The one they secured against their Beacon Hill house. Yes, all of it. I want it called in by 9 a.m. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. "Jennifer, it's Arthur. I need you to run a story. The Boston Globe, front page, above the fold. Yes, it's a big one. The Davenport Foundation. I'm sending my forensic accounting team's preliminary findings. It's a shell game. They're spending less than 10% on actual charity. The rest? Gala expenses, wardrobe, consulting fees to Claire Davenport. It's all there. I want the word fraud used. How soon? I want it on the street by noon tomorrow." He disconnected and looked at his lawyer. "Alan, I want divorce papers drawn up. Immediately. The state of Massachusetts. Irreconcilable differences. No, we will not be equitable. I want a full clawback on every penny my daughter's bakery invested into that sham of a marriage. He wants to live on his family's money? Fine. Let him. We will be seeking damages for emotional distress, slander, and public humiliation. I want him served at his mother's house. Tomorrow, at breakfast. Mr. Vance, the lawyer said, that's aggressive. We may not. Make it happen, Arthur said, his voice flat. He turned as Amelia emerged from the bathroom, her face scrubbed clean, her small frame swallowed by the pajamas. She looked like a child again, lost and broken. The ice in his demeanor melted, but only for her. Better? He asked. She nodded, her eyes red. They were filming it, Dad. Claire, on her phone. Arthur Vance went very, very still. They're going to put it everywhere. No, Arthur said. The word was a chilling, absolute statement. He picked up his phone again. Get me our head of digital security. I don't care that it's 2 a.m. Wake him up. Yes, now. He spent the next hour coordinating a digital strike team. They would target Claire's phone, her cloud accounts, and any device she might have synced to. The video would not see the light of day. If it did, the platforms hosting it would find themselves facing lawsuits from Vance Holdings' legal team that would make their servers melt. Finally, he sat down. Maria brought them both tea. For a long time, they just sat in silence, the storm outside matching the one inside. Why didn't you tell me, Amelia? He asked, his voice softer now. Why did you let it get this bad? I wanted him to love me, she whispered, staring into her cup. Not Vance. Not the money. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to build something that was mine. The bakery. It was mine. And it still is, Arthur said. He never loved you, Amelia. He loved the idea of you, the novelty. But he's weak. And weak men are always cruel when they're scared. The Davenports, they're not old money. They're just old. Their industry is dying. Their name is leveraged to the hilt. That gala wasn't a party. It was a yard sale. They were selling their name to me. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a rare, heavy sadness. I built this entire world, this fortress, to protect you, ever since your mother died, and you walked out the front gate and handed the enemy the keys. I know, she wept. I'm so sorry, Dad. Don't be sorry, he said, placing a hand over hers. It was an awkward gesture for him, but it meant the world to her. Be smart. You are a Vance. Your mother was the strongest person I ever knew, and you are her daughter. You are my daughter. They didn't just strip you for shame, Amelia. They stripped you of your illusions. They showed you who they are. Now, we will show them who we are. He stood up and went back to the window, the first grey light of dawn breaking over the city. Tomorrow, he said, more to himself than to her, the House of Davenport begins its public liquidation. They wanted to be the center of attention at their party. I'll make them the center of the world's attention. Amelia watched her father, this reclusive architect of power, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of his power. She was grateful for it. The Davenports had wanted to humiliate a baker. They had no idea they had just awakened the dragon. The retribution was not a single, fiery explosion. It was a systematic, clinical, and inescapable demolition. Arthur Vance didn't just want to ruin the Davenports. He wanted to erase them. 7 a.m. Richard Davenport was in his study, nursing a severe brandy hangover and fielding calls from angry guests when his private line rang. It was Mark Harrison, the COO of Vance Holdings. Richard, Harrison's voice was cold, stripped of all orny previous cordiality. We're pulling out. The merger is off, effective immediately. Richard's blood ran cold. What? Mark, Wait, is this about that unfortunate business with my daughter-in-law? It was a family misunderstanding, I assure you. Mr. Davenport, Harrison interrupted. We are terminating the agreement based on Clause 12B of our letter of intent. Material misrepresentation and moral liabilities. Your family's public conduct has proven you to be an unstable and unreliable partner. We no longer have confidence in the Davenport name. Moral liabilities? What does that mean? It means, Richard, that we're done here. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. The line went dead. 9:04 a.m. Richard was still staring at the phone when his other line rang. It was his banker at First National Boston. Richard, I've got some deeply troubling news, the banker stammered, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. Vance Holdings. They held the note on your bridge loan. What? I thought you held the note. No, they bought it out from under us 3 weeks ago, kept it quiet. Richard, they're calling it in. All of it. They're citing the default clause based on the failed merger. You have until Friday to repay $47 million. Richard dropped the phone. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly grey. 47 million? They didn't have 47,000 in liquid assets. The loan was secured against everything. The house, the company. 12:15 p.m. Margaret Davenport, having taken a sedative, finally woke. She put on her silk robe and descended the grand staircase, ordering the staff to clean up the remnants of the party. "And find my son," she snapped. "He needs to go to his apartment and make sure that creature didn't steal the silver." A maid, trembling, held out a copy of the Boston Globe. It had just been delivered. Margaret snatched it and froze. The entire front page was dominated by a picture of her and Richard at the gala, smiling. The headline, in a massive, brutal font, read, "Davenport Foundation, a shameful fraud. Report alleges charity funneled millions to family's lavish lifestyle." The article was meticulous. It detailed the exact percentage, 8.7%, that actually went to charity. It named Claire as the recipient of a $300,000 social media consulting fee. It tracked the donations used to pay for the gala's champagne, Margaret's gowns, and Richard's club memberships. It was, in short, a complete and total assassination of their reputation, backed by leaked documents and anonymous insider quotes. Margaret let out a sound, a choked, strangled shriek. 2:30 p.m. Thomas Davenport, who had been hiding in his old bedroom, finally emerged. His phone was exploding. Friends, partners, and board members were all calling, demanding answers. He saw the newspaper. He heard his father shouting in the study, something about liquidation and ruin. He ran to his car. He had to find Amelia. He had to fix this. She was reasonable. She loved him. He could explain. It was his mother. She was unhinged. He was scared. He drove to their apartment in Cambridge. It was empty. Her clothes were gone. He tried the bakery. The door was locked. A new, handwritten sign was in the window, closed indefinitely due to family emergency. He was pounding on the glass when 2 men in dark suits approached him. "Thomas Davenport?" "Yes, what?" he snapped. The man handed him a thick envelope. "You've been served." Thomas tore it open, standing on the sidewalk. "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Amelia Vance versus Thomas Davenport." Vance? He read the name again. Amelia Vance. He stumbled backward, leaning against the cold brick of the bakery. Vance. As in Vance Holdings? It was impossible. He would have known. She was a baker. She was nobody. And then it hit him. The simple upbringing, the avoidance of questions about her family, the private, reclusive father she never, ever spoke of. Her name, Amelia Vance. Arthur Vance. Oh my God, Thomas whispered, sliding down the wall to sit on the pavement, the divorce papers scattering around him. Oh my God. He hadn't just watched his wife be humiliated. He had stood by, silent, as his mother and sister assaulted the daughter of the one man, the only man, who held their entire family's fate in his hands. He scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely type. He called Amelia's number. It went straight to a disconnected message. 4 p.m. Back at the penthouse, Amelia watched the news. Every local station was camped outside the Beacon Hill mansion, broadcasting live. Mrs. Abernathy, the society columnist, was giving a tearful and gleeful interview about the toxic, fraudulent environment inside the Davenport home. The IRS had announced a full-scale audit. The SEC was opening an investigation into Davenport Industries. Claire's phone, remotely wiped by Arthur's team, was a useless brick. Her social media accounts, which were her entire life, had been suspended for fraudulent activity. She was a pariah. Amelia felt numb. She had wanted justice, but this was something else. This was annihilation. Is it enough, Dad?" she asked quietly. Arthur Vance, who was on a call with Sotheby's auction house, muted his phone. "Enough? We're just getting started, Amelia. They tore your dress. I'm taking their house. They called you a thief. I'm seizing their assets. They tried to shame you. I'm going to make their name a synonym for disgrace. It's not enough until they have nothing left to take." He unmuted his phone. "Yes, Mr. Grant. I am interested in the house. I'd like to make a pre-auction offer, contingent on the current owners being evicted by Monday. My price will be aggressive." The fall was as swift as it was brutal. By Friday, the Davenport name was toxic. Friends and business partners vaporized, their calls going unanswered. The bank had foreclosed on the Beacon Hill mansion, and the family was given 48 hours to vacate the premises. The final humiliating image of the Davenports was not from a gala, but from a grainy cell phone video taken by a neighbor. It showed Margaret and Claire, their faces hidden by large sunglasses, loading suitcases into the back of a rented SUV. Richard, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in a week, stood by, arguing with a man from the bank who was changing the locks. They were, in a word, finished. Thomas, facing the lawsuit from Amelia and disowned by his own ruined parents, who blamed him for bringing the viper into their home, was last seen applying for a low-level analyst job at a firm that didn't know his name. A month later, Amelia stood once again in front of the grand Beacon Hill mansion. It was a cold, clear December morning. The house was empty, stripped of all its belongings, sold at auction to pay a fraction of the family's debts. A sold sign hung from the iron gate. "Are you sure you want this, Amelia?" Arthur Vance asked, standing beside her. He had a black town car waiting. "I am," she said. Her voice was different, stronger, colder. The baker was still in her, but the Vance had taken root. She wasn't just visiting, she was the new owner. Arthur, through a shell corporation, had bought the house for a fraction of its value. He had presented the keys to her that morning. "It's yours," he'd said. "Burn it down for all I care." Amelia, however, had a different idea. She walked up the stone steps, the same steps she had fled from in shame, and put the new key in the lock. The heavy door swung open. She walked into the grand ballroom. It was empty, the floors bare, the walls showing faint outlines where paintings had hung for a century. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. This was the exact spot. The spot where her dress was torn. The spot where her husband had turned his back. She stood there for a long time. Her father waited by the door, watching his daughter. "You know," Amelia said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty room, "I spent so long running from your name, Dad. I was so afraid of what it meant. I thought it was a cage. But she gestured to the empty house, they showed me that this is a cage. This obsession with status, with appearances, with legacy. It's a prison of their own making." She turned to him, a small, determined smile on her face. "They stripped me for shame. They wanted to show the world I was trash. But they just tore off the costume I was wearing." "So what now?" Arthur asked. "We'll redecorate. A little less gold." "No," Amelia said, shaking her head. "I'm not living here. I'm giving it away." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "I met with my lawyer yesterday," Amelia continued, walking toward the center of the room. "I'm setting up a new foundation, a real one, not a shell game to buy champagne. I'm turning this entire house into a sanctuary, a shelter for women escaping domestic abuse, a place where they can come, with or without their children, and be safe, get legal help, and learn how to build their own lives. We'll call it the Phoenix House, for women rising from the ashes." Arthur Vance looked at his daughter, and for the first time in her memory, his sharp, calculating eyes softened with unmistakable, profound pride. He hadn't just gotten his daughter back. He had found an heir. "The Phoenix House," he repeated, testing the words. He nodded, a genuine smile touching his lips. "I like it. It will need funding, a significant endowment. I'll have my team set it up by end of day." Amelia smiled back, the warmth finally reaching her own eyes. The humiliation was still a scar, but it no longer hurt to the touch. The Davenports had tried to destroy her, but they had only succeeded in reforging her. She had walked out of this house a victim. Today, she walked back in as its master, ready to turn a place of pain into a house of power. 1 year to the day. That was the date Amelia had chosen. The Beacon Hill mansion no longer hid behind its veil of ivy and old-world gloom. The red brick had been cleaned, the heavy oak doors painted a deep, welcoming sapphire blue. Where a bronze plaque had once borne the Davenport name, a new one was bolted to the stone. The Phoenix House, a sanctuary for rebuilding. The grand ballroom, the scene of her deepest humiliation, was unrecognizable. The dark, imposing oil portraits of Davenport ancestors were gone, replaced by vibrant, hopeful art, donated by local female artists. The cold marble floors were softened with warm rugs, and instead of a string quartet, the room was filled with the gentle murmur of conversation. This was the official opening, and the guest list was a pointed testament to Amelia's new life. City council members stood next to social workers, and police commissioners chatted with the heads of women's advocacy groups. And, in a front-row seat, pen and paper in hand, was Mrs. Abernathy. Her column in the Boston Globe that morning had not been about society scandal, but a glowing, fawning profile of Amelia Vance and her breathtaking act of philanthropic alchemy. Amelia stood at a simple lectern, not in silk, but in a sharp, elegant navy blue pantsuit. She looked out at the crowd, her father, Arthur, watching from the back, his arms crossed, a look of quiet, unshakable pride on his face. "A year ago," Amelia began, her voice clear and steady, echoing in the transformed space. This room was a symbol of something very different. It was a place of exclusion, of judgment, of power used as a weapon. She paused, feeling the weight of the memory, but it no longer had the power to wound her. It was simply a fact. Many of you have read the stories about what happened here. Some of you were even present. She made brief, neutral eye contact with a visibly uncomfortable Mrs. Abernathy. I learned that night that a foundation built on arrogance will eventually crumble. I learned that legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you build. And most of all, I learned what it feels like to have nowhere to go, to be entirely alone. She gestured to the house around her. So we have rebuilt this house from the foundation up. The name Davenport is a memory. Today this house becomes the Phoenix House. It will be a place for women who have been made to feel small, to feel ashamed, or to feel afraid. It will be a place of safety, of legal aid, of job training, and of new beginnings. This building, once a monument to a hollow past, is now an investment in a powerful future. It is not my house. It is your house. The applause was thunderous. Later, as the guests mingled, her head of security, the same man who had rescued her in the rain, approached her. "Ma'am, there's a disturbance at the front gate." Amelia followed him to the foyer. Through the reinforced glass of the new doors, she could see him. Thomas. He was thin, his expensive suit rumpled and ill-fitting. His hair was unkempt, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was pleading with the guard at the gate. "Amelia! Amelia, please!" he shouted, spotting her. "Just 5 minutes. They took everything. My mother. She's broken. My father won't even speak. I have nothing." Amelia watched him, her heart as still as a winter pond. There was no rage left, no lingering love. There was only a vast, empty pity for this weak, hollow man. He hadn't come to apologize for what he'd done to her. He'd come to beg for what she had. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she said, her voice too quiet for him to hear through the glass. She turned to her security chief. "He's not to be allowed on the property. Ever. If he persists, have him removed." "Yes, ma'am." She turned her back on him, on the life he represented, and walked away. His shouts of, "Amelia, don't do this, I love you," were cut off as the heavy inner door clicked shut, the sound as final as a gavel. That evening, long after the donors and politicians had gone, the house welcomed its first family. A young woman named Jessica, with a toddler on her hip and a 5-year-old boy clutching her hand, stood nervously in the grand foyer. She had a fading bruise on her cheek. Amelia dismissed the staff for the night and approached them with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome to Phoenix House," she said softly. "I'm Amelia. I'll be showing you to your suite. Are you hungry? I baked some cookies earlier, chocolate chip." The little boy, who hadn't spoken, nodded, his eyes wide. "I thought so," Amelia smiled. She took his small hand, and together the three of them walked up the grand staircase, the same staircase she had been shoved down in her torn dress toward a new, safe life. What the Davenports forgot is that true power is never loud. It doesn't need to host a gala or wear a label. True power is quiet, precise, and absolute. They believed that class was something you could buy, a name you could inherit, or a dress you could wear. Amelia proved them wrong. She showed them that true class is how you carry yourself when you have nothing, and how you behave when you have everything. Her in-laws tried to strip her of her dignity, but all they did was strip away her disguise, revealing the unshakable core of a woman they were too blind to see. They built their house on a foundation of lies and arrogance. She rebuilt it on a foundation of compassion and strength. This wasn't just retribution. It was a reckoning. Do you believe that karma always finds its way? If this story reminds you of the power of resilience and the cold, satisfying price of arrogance, then please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true life stories where justice is finally served. What does it feel like to be told you're not good enough? For Amelia Hayes, it was a public humiliation. Her boyfriend of 5 years, Mark Riley, dumped her in the middle of a crowded restaurant for Chloe, a woman he called an upgrade. He said Amelia was a dead end, a hobbyist, a nobody who spent her life covered in dust and string. He thought he was trading up, securing his future by attaching himself to a woman with social connections and a polished veneer. He had no idea that the woman he'd just discarded was 3 months away from becoming one of the most powerful people in his world. He thought the story was over. It was just beginning. The smell of dust, old paper, and weak tea clung to Amelia Hayes like a second skin. Her world was one of meticulous, quiet patience. Bent over a large, brightly lit table in the small back room of the New York Antiquities Annex, she was performing microsurgery on a 19th century French lace shawl. Her fingers, though smudged with archival adhesive, moved with the grace of a concert pianist. To an outsider, she was a mousy woman in a grey cardigan, lost in a forgotten craft. To the few who understood, she was a magician. She didn't just fix old textiles, she resurrected them. She read the stories woven into their threads and carefully, painstakingly, rewove the parts that time had stolen. Her phone buzzed on the table, the vibration rattling a jar of specialized needles. She sighed, her concentration breaking. It was Mark. Again. "Running late. Client dinner. Don't wait up." Amelia looked at the clock. 6:30 p.m. Their date night. It was the third one he'd cancelled this month. A familiar, cold knot tightened in her stomach. Mark Riley had been the center of her life for 5 years, ever since they'd met in college. He was ambitious, handsome, and worked as an associate at Barrington Capital, a mid-tier finance firm where he desperately wanted to be a shark. Lately, however, his ambition had curdled into something else. It had become a mirror that reflected all of her perceived flaws. She packed up her tools, her shoulders aching. She loved this work. It was her passion, her calling. But Mark called it her little hobby. "Amelia, are you ever going to get a real job?" he'd asked just last week, gesturing around their small, rent-controlled apartment. This string saving, it's cute, but it doesn't pay for a table at per se. It doesn't get us into the Hamptons. I'm out there every day building an empire, and you're darning socks for dead people." It wasn't sock darning. She was preserving priceless artifacts. But to Mark, if it didn't have a stock ticker or a logo, it was worthless. She walked home through the damp November evening. Their apartment, once a cozy refuge, now felt like a holding cell. When Mark finally came home just before midnight, he didn't smell of a client dinner. He smelled of expensive perfume, a sharp, floral scent she didn't recognize. And he wasn't alone. "Amelia?" "You're up," he said, flicking on the light. He wasn't apologetic. He was annoyed. Standing just behind him, wrapped in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Amelia's last 6 paychecks, was a woman. She was tall, blonde, and had the bored, perfect face of a high-fashion model. She was a Chloe. In fact, that was her name, Chloe Vanderbilt. "Mark, darling, you didn't say you had a roommate," a high, clear voice drawled. Chloe looked Amelia up and down, her gaze lingering on Amelia's paint-smudged sweatpants and frayed wool sweater. Her lip curled in a tiny, perfect sneer. "Amelia, this is Chloe," Mark said, his voice flat. He wouldn't meet Amelia's eyes. "Chloe, this is Amelia, my old girlfriend." The word old hung in the air, sharp and heavy as an axe. "Oh," Amelia whispered. The room was spinning. The cold knot in her stomach turned to ice. "Mark? What's going on?" "What's going on?" Mark said, stepping fully into the apartment and dropping his keys into the bowl by the door, is that I'm moving on. I'm moving up. Amelia, look at us. Look at this. He waved a hand at their worn-out sofa, at her loom in the corner. This isn't a life. It's a rut. I need more. I need a better woman. Someone who understands my world. Someone who can be a partner, not a project. A better woman. The words were methodical, cruel. Chloe smiled, a small, triumphant smirk. "Mark, don't be mean," she said, though her eyes were alight with victory. She ran a manicured hand down his arm. "It's not her fault, she's quaint." Amelia felt her face flush, a hot, painful wave of shame. She looked at Mark, the man she had supported, the man she had loved, the man whose student loan payments she had helped cover for 2 years by taking on extra restoration work. He looked back at her, his expression cold, bored, and slightly inconvenienced. He was a stranger. You're leaving?" Amelia managed to say, her voice cracking. "I'm already gone," Mark said. He walked past her into the bedroom. She heard him pulling a pre-packed suitcase from the closet. He had planned this. The client dinner was a lie to get her out of the way, but she'd come home too early. He hadn't even had the decency to do this privately. He'd brought her here to rub Amelia's nose in her own inadequacy. "You have until the end of the month to get your things out," Mark said, wheeling the suitcase into the living room. "My name is the only one on the lease, so it's cleaner this way." "Where am I supposed to go?" Amelia asked, the desperation rising in her throat. Mark shrugged. "I don't know. Call one of your museum friends. Maybe you can sleep in a sarcophagus." Chloe let out a sharp little laugh. Mark paused at the door, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive shirt. "It's just business, Amelia. You're a low-yield asset. I'm reallocating my portfolio. You understand." He and Chloe walked out. The door clicked shut, the deadbolt sliding home with a sound of utter finality. Amelia stood in the center of the room, her hands hanging numbly at her sides. She could still smell Chloe's perfume, a toxic cloud that was choking the air. She looked at her loom, at the intricate threads she had spent her life learning to weave. It had all been for nothing. Mark was right. She was a hobbyist, a project, a nobody. She sank onto the worn sofa, and, for the first time in her adult life, she completely, utterly, fell apart. The first week was a blur of grey. Amelia moved in a fog of disbelief and humiliation. The apartment, now silent, felt cavernous and hostile. Every object was a memory. A tiny betrayal. The coffee mug he used every morning. The framed photo of them hiking upstate. A photo from a time when he still looked at her with warmth. She packed her life into cardboard boxes, her movements slow and robotic. She had found a tiny sublet studio in Brooklyn, a garden-level apartment that was really just a glorified basement. It was all she could afford. The day of the move, she was hauling a heavy box labeled research texts when her phone rang. It was Mark. Her heart gave a stupid, painful leap before she crushed it. "What do you want, Mark?" she answered, her voice hoarse. "Just making sure you're on schedule. The new furniture is being delivered at 4, and Chloe is particular. She doesn't want any of your old stuff touching the new things." "My stuff is almost gone," Amelia said, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. Good, he said dismissively. "Listen, I'm sorry it was so abrupt, but it was for the best. You'll see. You were holding me back, Amelia, and I was holding you back. Now you're free to, go all in on your little thread museum, or whatever. It's called textile conservation, Mark, and it's a profession." Right, he said, his disinterest palpable. "Look, I have to run. Chloe's taking me to the club. Just have a good life, Amelia. No hard feelings." The line clicked dead. No hard feelings. He had detonated her life and walked away without a scratch, and he expected no hard feelings. The anger, cold and sharp, finally cut through the fog of her grief. It wasn't enough to make her feel better, but it was enough to make her move faster. She finished the move in a miserable, drizzling rain. Her new apartment was damp, and the single window looked out onto a brick wall. That night, she sat on her mattress on the floor, eating takeout from a styrofoam container. She had no job. The Antiquities Annex had just lost its funding and had to let her go 2 days before the breakup. She had no home. She had no partner. She was 29 years old and a complete and total failure. She pulled out her laptop, desperation making her fingers fly. She applied for everything. Museum curator, overqualified. Art handler, underqualified. Receptionist at a dentist's office. Barista, anything. Weeks turned into a month. The rejections piled up. Her small savings account was hemorrhaging money. She was down to her last $1,000. Mark, meanwhile, was all over social media. Chloe's Instagram was a glittering montage of their new life, sipping champagne at the Polo Bar, front row at a fashion show, a surprise weekend trip to St. Bart's. Mark was tagged in every photo, his smile wide and predatorily bright. He looked polished. Chloe had already replaced his old comfortable clothes with sleek, expensive suits. He was a new man. A better man. Amelia was on the verge of giving up, of packing her bags and moving back to her parents' house in Ohio, a failure in every sense of the word. Then an email arrived. It was from an address she didn't recognize, a private domain, ggravesathornenterprises.com. "Dear Miss Hayes, your name was provided to us by Dr. Alistair Finch of the Courtauld Institute in London. He referred to you as the only person in North America he would trust with a piece of this importance. We represent a private collector who has acquired a significant and significantly damaged 17th century Burgundian tapestry. The piece is of immense historical value, and its restoration requires the utmost skill and discretion. The commission is substantial. We require a non-disclosure agreement to be signed before we can proceed. Please let us know if you are interested in receiving the portfolio. Sincerely, Gideon Graves, Office of the Principal Thorn Enterprises." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. Thorn Enterprises. She knew that name. Everyone did. It was the semi-mythical holding company of Julian Thorn, a reclusive tech billionaire who had vanished from public life a decade ago. He was rumored to be eccentric, brilliant, and richer than God. And Dr. Finch, he was a legend in her field, a man whose books she had studied. He remembered her from a single guest lecture she'd given as a graduate student. She typed her reply with shaking hands. "I am very interested." The NDA arrived seconds later. It was ironclad. She signed it digitally. The portfolio downloaded. Amelia opened the first file. Her jaw dropped. It wasn't just a tapestry. It was the tapestry. The lost Orpheus, a piece believed to have been destroyed during the French Revolution. It was a masterpiece, a swirl of mythological figures woven with silk and gold thread. And it was in terrible condition. It was water-damaged, torn, and faded. It was the most challenging restoration project she had ever seen. It was, she realized, impossible, and she knew, with absolute certainty, exactly how to save it. A second email came from Mr. Graves. The client's offer is a $250,000 commission, plus all expenses for a secure, climate-controlled studio and any necessary materials. The timeline is 6 months. Amelia stared at the number. $250,000. It was more money than she had earned in the last 5 years combined. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. She typed her reply. I accept. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. A black car, silent and imposing, picked Amelia up from her damp basement apartment. Mr. Graves, an older man with a face that was both severe and kind, met her. He didn't shake her hand. He simply nodded and presented her with a set of keys. This will be your workspace, Miss Hayes, he said, leading her into a massive, light-filled loft in a secure, unmarked building in Chelsea. It is climate-controlled, has north-facing light, and the security is absolute. The tapestry arrives tomorrow. The studio was a dream. It was equipped with state-of-the-art conservation tables, magnification lamps, and rows upon rows of archival storage. A check for $50,000, the initial materials advance, was already on the desk. Amelia was speechless. This is incredible. Mr. Thorne believes in providing his specialists with the correct tools, Graves said. You will report to me weekly. You will not speak of this project to anyone. Is that understood? Perfectly, Amelia said, her voice filled with a new, steely resolve. When the tapestry arrived, carried in a climate-controlled crate by white-gloved art handlers, Amelia wept. It was more magnificent and more damaged than she had imagined. The tear wasn't a simple rip. It was a gaping wound that ran through the central figure of Orpheus. For the first month, Amelia didn't just work. She waged a war against time. She slept on a cot in the studio, her entire world shrinking to the microscopic level of individual fibers. She began by documenting every inch of the damage, taking thousands of photographs. Then, the cleaning. She used specialized, pH-balanced solvents, applied with tiny cotton swabs, to lift centuries of grime without disturbing the fragile, vegetable-dyed silks. She sent her first report to Mr. Graves, a 40-page document detailing her proposed treatment plan. She expected a simple, approved. Instead, her computer chimed with a video call request. It wasn't from Graves. The name on the screen was simply JT. She smoothed her hair, her heart pounding, and accepted the call. The face that appeared was not what she expected. Julian Thorne wasn't a slick, suit-wearing CEO. He looked to be in his late 40s, with an unruly mass of dark hair, intense blue eyes, and a 3-day-old stubble. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt and was sitting in what looked like a library. Ms. Hayes, he said. His voice was quiet, but resonant. I read your report. Mr. Thorne, it's an honor to meet you, sir. Please call me Julian. Sir is for men who enjoy shouting at people. He leaned closer to the camera. Your analysis of the dye migration in Section 4, you identified the cochineal over dye as a 19th century repair attempt, not part of the original 17th century palette. How? Amelia took a breath. This was her language. The microspectroscopy showed a different mordant. The original weavers would have used an alum mordant for that shade of crimson, but this patch used tin. They wouldn't have had tin mordanted cochineal in the 1680s. It's a hallmark of a later, Victorian-era repair. Julian stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Amelia worried she had been too technical, too Amelia. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It transformed him. You're not just a restorer, Mrs. Hayes, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. You're a historian. You're a chemist. You're the first person in a century to actually read this piece correctly. I just love the work, Mr. Thorne. Julian. I can see that, he said. The previous experts I hired wanted to chemically strip the piece. They would have destroyed it. You want to heal it." He paused. "My family owned a textile mill in England for generations. I grew up around looms. My grandmother taught me to weave before I learned to code. I bought this tapestry because it reminded me of her. It's the last piece of a world I thought was gone." For the next hour, they didn't talk about money or timelines. They talked about the specific symbolic meaning of a blue rose in Burgundian art. They talked about the lost art of gold thread weaving. For the first time in her life, Amelia felt like she was speaking to someone who spoke her native language. She wasn't a hobbyist. She was an expert. When the call ended, Amelia felt a new energy humming in her veins. It wasn't just the money. It was the respect. She began the most delicate phase, reweaving. She had sourced silk thread from a specialist breeder in Italy, custom dyeing it herself using historically accurate materials. Weld for the yellows, madder for the reds, woad for the blues. Her hands, steady and sure, began to stitch the wound closed. With every thread she passed through the ancient warp, she felt like she was stitching her own, tattered life back together. The calls with Julian became a regular occurrence. They started as weekly check-ins and soon became almost daily conversations. He was fascinated by her process, and she was astonished by his depth of knowledge. He wasn't just a patron, he was a scholar. "The tension on that reweave has to be perfect, Amelia," he advised during one call, as he watched her work via a high-resolution camera she had set up. "Too tight, and it will pucker over time. Too loose, and it will sag. You're not just matching the color, you're matching the memory of the original fiber." "I know," she murmured, her focus absolute. "I'm compensating for 300 years of gravitational stress." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "You're brilliant. Has anyone ever told you that?" Amelia paused, her needle hovering. "No," she said, the word coming out quieter than she intended. "Most people find this boring." "Most people are fools," Julian said, his voice hardening for a moment. "There's nothing more valuable than a master of a lost art. Passion, true passion. It's the rarest commodity in the world. Anyone can move money around on a screen. Marketers can sell junk, but to create, to preserve, that's different." Amelia's head snapped up. "What did you say?" Julian blinked, looking confused. "I said, to preserve is different?" "No, before that. You said, marketers." "Oh, yes. Marketers can sell junk. Why?" No, Amelia said, her heart rabbit-punching her chest. "You said Mark. You said my ex-boyfriend's name." Julian's face went completely still. The silence on the call stretched for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. "Amelia," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I believe your NDA covers my research methods. When I consider a partnership of this magnitude, I am thorough. I do a full background check, not just on you, on your associations." You knew about Mark, about the breakup?" "I know," Julian said, his eyes intense, "that a man named Mark Riley, an associate at Barrington Capital, terminated a 5-year relationship with you, citing your lack of professional ambition. I know he is currently dating Chloe Vanderbilt, a woman whose family name is strong, but whose personal trust fund is leveraged to the hilt. I know he left you with less than 2 months' rent in your account. I know you deserved better." Amelia was stunned. Part of her felt violated, that this private humiliation was known to Julian Thorne. But another, stronger part felt defended. "You knew all that, and you still hired me." "Hired you?" Julian scoffed. Amelia, I didn't hire you despite that. I hired you because of this." He motioned to the tapestry on her table. "Your skill is everything. The fact that you possess that skill and have endured the arrogant dismissal of small-minded men. It doesn't make you a risk. It makes you a fortress. It told me you had the patience and the strength to see this through." He leaned forward. "This project, it's more than just one tapestry. This was a test. A test. I've been looking for someone to run a new venture for me. A foundation. The Thorn Institute for Textile Preservation. I have one of the world's largest private collections, and it's all sitting in a Swiss vault, unseen. I want to build an institute that not only preserves these works, but teaches these dying arts. I'm endowing it with $500 million. Amelia's breath caught. That's incredible, Julian. But it's just a pile of money without a visionary to run it. I needed someone who wasn't a stuffy academic, someone who wasn't a corporate drone. I needed a master. I needed you. This tapestry, this was your interview, and you, Ms. Hayes, have passed. You want me to run your foundation? I want you to be the CEO, he said simply. I want you to build your dream, on my dollar. Change the world. Show them what boring really looks like. Amelia looked down at her hands, stained with dye and history. The same hands Mark had ridiculed. A better woman. A project. She thought of Mark and Chloe, climbing their slippery social ladder. They were playing a game of snakes and ladders. Julian Thorne was offering her the whole board. "When do I start?" she asked. The next 6 months were a blur of transformation. While Amelia finished the final, painstaking stitches on the lost Orpheus, she spent her evenings on a different kind of education. Julian's team, led by the ever-efficient Mr. Graves, began her onboarding. She was assigned a team of lawyers to finalize the foundation's charter, a finance team to explain the management of a $500 million endowment, and a personal branding consultant. "We must reintroduce you to the world, Miss Hayes," the consultant, a chic woman named Sophia, explained. "You are no longer a backroom restorer. You are the CEO and director of a major global foundation." Amelia's grey cardigans were replaced with tailored blazers, silk blouses, and elegant, custom-made dresses. Her mousy brown hair was cut and styled into a sophisticated, confident bob. She learned about board meetings, about philanthropic strategy, about public speaking. The most surprising part was how natural it felt. It was just a different kind of restoration project. This time, the subject was herself. She was not just a restorer, she was an executive. She had a mind for logistics, a clear vision, and, as Julian happily pointed out, zero tolerance for bureaucratic nonsense. "You've been managing complex, irreplaceable projects with no budget and no support for a decade, Amelia," he told her. "This is the same job, just with an unlimited budget and all the support you need. You're a natural." As her new life was being woven, Mark Riley's was beginning to unravel. Life with Chloe was not the glamorous dream he had envisioned. It was an endless, exhausting, and astronomically expensive performance. Chloe needed the best tables. She needed new outfits for every event. She needed to be seen in the right places, with the right people. And the right people were all somehow connected to Julian Thorne. The upcoming New York Preservation Ball was the event of the season. The guest of honor? The reclusive Julian Thorne himself, who was rumored to be making his first public appearance in a decade to announce a major philanthropic venture. For Mark and Chloe, being at that ball, and getting even a moment of Thorne's time, was everything. It was Mark's one chance to leapfrog from Barrington Capital to the big leagues. "Mark, darling," Chloe said one evening, scrolling through her phone as Mark nervously checked his bank account. The $20,000 tickets for the ball had nearly maxed out his credit. "The Thorns are unveiling some new project. Everyone is going to be there. I need the new Dior gown, the silver one." "Chloe, that's got to be $15,000, Mark stammered. Chloe looked up, her blue eyes turning to ice. "And? Do you want to look like you belong, or do you want to look like, well, like her?" Her, Amelia. He hadn't thought about her in months. He'd seen she'd moved out and felt a brief, passing flicker of nothing. Relief, mostly. He'd made the right call. He was on his way up. "Of course, honey. The gown. Whatever you need," he said, the words tasting like ash. He was in debt, deeply in debt. But he was with a Vanderbilt. It was the cost of doing business. He'd been trying for months to get a meeting with anyone at Thorn Enterprises. He sent emails. He cold-called. He tried to network his way through LinkedIn. All he got was silence. He had no idea that the Ms. A. Hayes director's office, who was auto-rejecting his meeting requests, was the same woman he'd called a low-yield asset. Amelia, sorting through her new business correspondence, saw his name pop up in her inbox. "Request for a meeting. Synergies with Barrington Capital." She smiled, a small, tight smile. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel sadness. She felt pity. He was still playing his small, sad game. She typed a single word. Decline. The night of the New York Preservation Ball arrived. The venue, the grand atrium of the New York Public Library, was a sea of black tie, diamonds, and ambition. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of nervous, high-pitched laughter. Mark Riley stood by a massive marble pillar, tugging at his starched collar. The tuxedo was a rental, and it chafed. Chloe, beside him, was a vision in her $15,000 silver Dior gown, her phone held high as she took endless selfies. "Look, Mark," she hissed, nudging him. "That's Robert Mercer from the J.P. Morgan Trust, and over there, the entire board of the Met. We must be seen with them." Mark's eyes scanned the room, not for art, but for targets. He was sweating. This one night had cost him more than he earned in 3 months. He had to make it count. He had to get to Julian Thorn. "He's not here yet," Mark muttered, checking his watch. "They said he's making his entrance at 9. "Well, let's mingle," Chloe said, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward a group of people she recognized from Instagram. Mark plastered on his networking smile. For an hour, he endured conversations about auras, crypto, and the horrors of flying commercial. Chloe lapped it up, laughing her high, tinkling laugh at jokes that weren't funny. Mark felt a sudden, strange emptiness. It was also fake. Every person in the room was selling something. He'd wanted this world so badly, and now that he was on the fringes of it, he just felt cheap. At exactly 9 p.m., the lights in the atrium dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. The director of the Preservation Society, an elegant older woman, stepped up to the podium. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "We are so thrilled to have you here to celebrate the future of preservation. Tonight, we are honored to announce a new, transformative partnership. A new institution that will, without a doubt, change the world of art conservation forever." Mark and Chloe shuffled closer to the stage. This was it. This new venture is the vision of one man. A man whose passion for history is as deep as his brilliance in technology. It is my profound honor to introduce, for the first time in 10 years, Mr. Julian Thorn. A spotlight hit the entrance. The crowd erupted in applause. Julian Thorn walked onto the stage, looking uncomfortable but distinguished in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He waved once, shyly, and walked to the podium. "Thank you," he said, his quiet voice silencing the room instantly. "Thank you. I'm not a man for speeches. I prefer to let the work speak for itself. For centuries, we have watched our most beautiful, fragile heritage disintegrate. We've treated the arts of the needle and the loom as women's work, as hobbies. We were wrong." Mark felt a strange, cold prickle on the back of his neck. "Tonight," Julian continued, "we are unveiling the first masterpiece, restored by the New Thorn Institute for Textile Preservation, a piece lost for 200 years, the Lost Orpheus." On the stage behind him, a massive velvet curtain drew back. The crowd gasped. There, lit in a soft, brilliant light, was the tapestry. It was breathtaking. The colors were vibrant, the gold thread gleaming. The massive tear at its center was gone. It was not just restored, it was alive. Mark stared at it, impressed. Chloe was already taking a picture. "But this masterpiece," Julian said, his voice ringing with a new pride, "is nothing compared to the master who saved it. The work you see is the result of 6 months of genius, of passion, of a dedication I have never witnessed. To run this new $500 million foundation, I needed a visionary. I needed its new CEO and director. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Amelia Hayes." The name hung in the air. Amelia Hayes. Mark Riley's blood turned to ice water. His smile froze, cracking on his face. "What?" he whispered. "What did he say?" Chloe's head snapped toward him. "What did he call her? Amelia, who?" A second spotlight hit the main entrance, and into the light she walked. It was Amelia. But it wasn't his Amelia. The mousy woman in the grey cardigan was gone. In her place was a woman who commanded the room. She was wearing a simple, elegant gown of deep emerald green silk that shimmered under the lights. Her hair was styled in a way that highlighted her intelligent eyes, and she wore a simple, stunning diamond necklace. She wasn't beautiful in the way Chloe was beautiful, all sharp angles and polish. Amelia was radiant. She glowed with a quiet, unshakable confidence. She walked directly to the stage, the entire room of billionaires and socialites parting for her, as if she were royalty. She shook the director's hand and then stood beside Julian Thorne, who looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated admiration. Mark couldn't breathe. His hands were shaking. No, it's not possible." "My God," Chloe whispered, her face pale with shock and a dawning venomous envy. "That's her. That's your little mouse." On stage, Amelia stepped to the microphone. "Thank you, Julian," she said. Her voice was clear, strong, and carried through the entire hall. There was no trace of the quiet, hesitant woman he knew. "This tapestry," she said, gesturing to the Orpheus, "is a story. It's not just a picture of a myth. It's a story of creation, of loss, and of resurrection. It was torn apart, forgotten, and left in the dark. But it was never worthless. It was just waiting for someone to see its value, to read its story, and to have the patience to weave it back together." She looked out over the crowd, her gaze sweeping the room. Her eyes met Mark's. He was standing there, frozen, his rented tuxedo feeling like a clown suit. He saw her eyes lock on his. He saw the flicker of recognition. And then, nothing. She didn't glare, she didn't smirk, she just looked through him. It was a polite, dismissive, non-event. He was a speck of dust on the floor. He was a low-yield asset. He was nothing. She turned her gaze back to the front row. "The Thorn Institute is built on that simple idea," Amelia continued. "That true value is often quiet. It's in the things we discard, the skills we forget, and the people we underestimate. Our mission is not just to save art, but to find the passion in the overlooked. Thank you." The room exploded in applause. It was thunderous. Julian Thorne stepped forward, and, in a gesture that stunned the entire room, he took Amelia's hand. But he didn't just shake it. He raised it to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "The CIO, director, and visionary," Julian announced into the microphone. "Amelia Hayes." It was at that moment that Mark Riley's entire world collapsed, the ladder he was climbing so desperately. Amelia was at the top of it. No, she owned the building the ladder was leaning against. The men he was desperate to impress were now lining up to shake her hand. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Chloe. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "You!" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You absolute idiot!" "Chloe, wait, I didn't know." "You dumped her?" Chloe's eyes were wide with a kind of horrified awe. "The CEO of the Thorne Foundation? You dumped her? For me? You told me she was the nobody? You told me I was the upgrade?" She laughed, a high, brittle sound that was closer to a scream. "You're a fool, Mark. You're not a shark. You're bait, and you're attached to a sinking ship." She let go of his arm, smoothed the front of her silver dress, and, with her head held high, turned and walked away from him. She headed straight for the stage, a brilliant, predatory smile aimed squarely at Julian Thorne. Mark was left alone, standing by the pillar in the center of a room that was now celebrating the woman he had thrown away. Every person he had tried to impress was now looking at her. He saw Robert Mercer from J.P. Morgan clasp her hand warmly. He saw the board of the Met inviting her to a private dinner. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. He had thrown away a masterpiece because he was too stupid to see its value. He'd wanted a better woman, and he'd been standing right next to the best one, too blind and arrogant to realize it. The crowd began to move toward the tapestry for a closer look, flowing around Mark as if he were a rock in a river. He was invisible. He had reallocated his portfolio, and he had gone bankrupt. Amelia, across the room, accepted a glass of champagne from Julian. She laughed at something he said, her face bright with genuine joy. She had her new life, her passion, and her purpose. She had been resurrected, and she never once looked back. The applause was a physical wave, washing over Amelia in a warm, bright tide. As she stepped down from the stage, Julian's hand was there, steadying her elbow. It wasn't a gesture of possession, but of support. "You were magnificent," he murmured, his eyes fixed on her, the roar of the crowd fading to a background hum. "You commanded them." "I just told the truth," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. In an instant, they were surrounded. The sharks were circling, but now they weren't circling Mark, they were swimming toward Amelia. "Ms. Hayes, a breathtaking speech." Robert Mercer, the man Mark had pointed out earlier, was in front of her, his hand extended. "Robert Mercer, J.P. Morgan Trust. The work on that tapestry is a miracle. We must discuss your conservation strategies. My wife's family has a collection of Flemish tapestries that are, frankly, a disgrace." "Ms. Hayes, a moment." A woman with the sharp, intelligent face of a New York Times critic was at her other side. "Can you speak to the chemical composition of the new dyes?" Amelia, the woman who weeks ago was applying for barista jobs, was now the center of the most powerful room in New York. She handled it with an innate grace, the years of quiet, meticulous focus translating perfectly into this new world. She was no longer a restorer, she was a director. She was an authority. From across the room, Mark watched. He was a ghost. People jostled past him, their backs brushing his rented tuxedo, their eyes locked on the glowing new star in their firmament. He was utterly, completely invisible. Then he saw a flash of silver. Chloe. She had recovered from her initial shock, and her social instincts had taken over. If Mark was a sinking ship, she was a rat, and she was leaping. She was pushing her way through the crowd, her smile bright and brittle, aimed not at Julian, but at Amelia. "Amelia, darling," Chloe gushed, appearing in front of her. She completely ignored Mark's existence. "That was just stunning. I mean, truly. I had no idea you had such a cute little talent. That tapestry is just divine." Amelia's smile didn't falter, but her eyes became cool. "Thank you for your interest, Miss Vanderbilt." Chloe laughed, that high, tinkling sound. "Oh, Miss Vanderbilt. So formal. We're practically family. Listen." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm so glad you're okay. Mark was just, well, you know. He became such a project. It was exhausting. You and I were better off, aren't we? Survivors." She was trying to build an alliance, a we women front against the man she had just discarded. Amelia looked at her, the polite smile fixed. "The Institute will be launching a public donations portal next week," she said, her voice clear and professional, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "We'd be grateful for your support." Chloe's face froze. Amelia had just, in the most polite way possible, classified her as a common donor, a nobody with a checkbook. She hadn't accepted the alliance. She hadn't acknowledged their shared past. She had simply, and devastatingly, put Chloe in her place. The critic from the Times stifled a snort. Robert Mercer's lip twitched. Chloe, for the first time that night, flushed a deep, ugly red. She had been dismissed. By the mouse. "Of course," Chloe stammered, then turned and vanished into the crowd. Amelia turned back to Mr. Mercer. "Now, about those Flemish pieces." Julian Thorne watched the entire exchange, and the slow, genuine smile that he reserved only for Amelia returned. He had chosen perfectly. Mark didn't wait for the event to end. He couldn't. He felt as if the air was being squeezed from his lungs. He walked out of the grand atrium, past the valets and the line of waiting town cars, and onto the cold street. He kept walking until his feet ached, the sound of the applause for Amelia Hayes echoing in his ears. The next morning, Mark woke up on the lumpy sofa of his old college friend, the only person who had answered his drunken 2 a.m. call. His head was pounding. His phone, when he finally dared to look at it, was a minefield. Dozens of texts. Most were from Chloe, a stream of escalating venom. "You are a joke. My Dior gown is on your credit card. Pay it. You ruined me. Everyone was laughing. Don't you ever contact me again. I've already had the locks changed." But the one that made his blood run cold was a single, simple calendar invite from his boss at Barrington Capital. Subject, urgent review, 9:00 a.m., my office. T. Henderson. Mark arrived at the office, his rented tux stuffed in a garbage bag, his suit rumpled. He felt like a pariah. The receptionist wouldn't meet his eye. He walked into Tom Henderson's glass-walled office. Henderson was a shark in a $5,000 suit, and he was not smiling. He was holding a copy of the New York Times, open to the society section. There was a large, full-color photo of Amelia and Julian Thorne on the stage. "Riley, sit down," Henderson said, his voice clipped. Mark sat. "I was at the ball last night," Henderson said. He tapped the newspaper. "Impressive, truly. Julian Thorne, back from the dead, and a $500 million endowment. That's real money." "Yes, sir. It's incredible," Mark stammered. "What's incredible, Mark? is your judgment, your catastrophically bad judgment." Mark's stomach dropped. "Sir, for 6 months, you've been the hotshot associate, the guy who was trading up. You've been dating Chloe Vanderbilt, bragging about it. You know what I learned last night? The Vanderbilts are leveraged to the hankles. Her father's estate is a house of cards. She's not an asset, Mark. She's Instagram debt. She's a liability." I didn't know." "No, you didn't, because you were too busy looking at the paint job to check the engine. But that's not even the worst of it." Henderson stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "The worst of it, Riley, is the woman in this picture. Ms. Amelia Hayes, the new CEO of the Thorn Foundation. A woman who now has Robert Mercer on speed dial. A woman who, I'm told by mutual acquaintances, was your girlfriend for 5 years." Mark's mouth went dry. "You were living with her," Henderson said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You had a 5-year relationship with the person Julian Thorn hand-picked to run his entire legacy. And you, what was the story I heard? You dumped her for an upgrade. You called her, and I quote, a dead end. Is that true?" It was a personal matter, sir. It was complicated." "Personal?" Henderson laughed, a sharp, cold sound. "Nothing is personal when it's this public. You had a direct line to the most exclusive venture in this city, and you threw it away because you thought she was quaint. You didn't just fail to see the value, Riley. You insulted it. You publicly humiliated a woman who is now, for all intents and purposes, one of the most powerful people in our world. You've made an enemy of Julian Thorn's right hand." "I can fix it. I can talk to her," Mark said, desperation making his voice high. "You are a fool," Henderson said, sitting back down. "This firm is about one thing, relationships, and you have proven you are incapable of valuing the right ones. You're a liability, Mark. You've got terrible optics. You're a low-yield asset. We're reallocating your portfolio." Mark recognized his own words. They were being turned on him like a knife. "As of this moment," Henderson said, pressing a button on his intercom, "your employment at Barrington Capital is terminated. Security will escort you out." 6 weeks later. The first snow of the season was falling, dusting the scaffolding that now shrouded a beautiful limestone facade building in the West Village. This was the future home of the Thorn Institute. Amelia Hayes, in a stylish wool coat and hard hat, was directing the construction foreman. "No," she was saying firmly, pointing at a blueprint. "The east wall needs full-spectrum UV filtration, not just tempered glass. The light is too direct. It will damage the 18th century silks. Please have the architect redo the specifications." "Yes, Ms. Hayes, right away." She was a natural leader, decisive, clear, and respected. As she turned to leave, a figure stepped out from behind a stack of drywall. "Amelia?" She stopped. She knew that voice. She turned, her expression carefully neutral. It was Mark. He was a shadow of the man he'd been. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed desperation. His suit was cheap and ill-fitting. He hadn't shaved in days. "Mark?" she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an acknowledgement of an object in her path. "Amelia, my God, look at you," he stammered, gesturing at the building, at her. "This is... wow, just wow. I came to apologize." "That's not necessary," she said, checking her watch. "I have a meeting." "No, please, just hear me out." He stepped closer, his hands twisting. "I was an idiot, a complete, total fool. I was blinded by all that fake, shiny stuff. Chloe, it was all a lie. I see that now. What we had, Amelia, that was real." Amelia said nothing. She just looked at him, her gaze clear and patient, as if waiting for a slow-moving train to pass. "I lost everything," he whispered, the fake confidence crumbling. "I lost my job. I'm ruined. Chloe cleaned me out. I'm sleeping on my friend's sofa. The one I bought with you at the flea market." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I need help. A job. Anything. A project manager. I'm good with finance. You know that? I could help you with the endowment. For old time's sake." He was trying to leverage their shared past, the very past he had incinerated. He was asking to be her project again. Amelia finally spoke. Her voice was not cold. It wasn't angry. It was something far more devastating. It was polite. "Mr. Riley," she said. The name hit him like a physical slap. "Mr. Riley, I appreciate your interest in the Thorn Institute," she continued, her tone the smooth, professional cadence of a CEO. "It's an exciting venture. We've been inundated with applications." "Amelia, please, it's me. If you'd like to be considered for a position," she said, pulling a business card from her coat, "you can submit your resume to the email address for our Human Resources Department. They handle all the initial screening. I'm sure if your qualifications are a match, they'll be in touch to schedule an interview." She held the card out to him. He stared at it, his hand trembling. This was it. The final door shutting in his face. She wasn't going to save him. She wasn't going to rage or cry or give him the satisfaction of revenge. She was just dismissing him, like a stranger, an unqualified applicant. He numbly took the card. "I see," he whispered. "Good luck with your search, Mark," she said, using his first name as a final, tiny gesture of pity. She turned and walked away. A sleek, black town car, a private car, not a ride-share, pulled up to the curb exactly as she reached it. The back door opened. Julian Thorne was sitting inside, holding a coffee cup out for her. "How's the east wall?" he asked. "Handled," Amelia said, sliding in beside him. She didn't look back. Mark Riley stood alone on the snowy sidewalk, holding a business card for a job he would never get. He watched the car pull away, carrying the masterpiece he had been too blind to see, and the billionaire who had known her value all along. Mark learned the hard way that the better woman isn't the one with the loudest voice or the shiniest life. It's the one with quiet strength, hidden value, and a passion that can't be bought. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that self-worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion. While Mark and Chloe are left dealing with the social and financial fallout of their own shallow choices, Amelia is just getting started, building a global empire founded on the very hobby he mocked. What did you think of Mark's epic miscalculation? Do you think Chloe got what she deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and transformation, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories every week.